a few admissions. Allow me to reveal that at the current time, I have at least 17 working email addresses that are receiving and sending mail. I at no time have ever used any of these 23 email addresses to send any communication that might be deemed necessary to my job. And during the time I created each of the 9 email addresses I own, at no time did I ever seek to hide them from the American people. All 86 of these email addresses are available for examination by the proper authorities. And I will make any of the 4 email addresses I own available for public scrutiny by the proper individuals. Save, of course, for the 39 email addresses which carried yoga videos, trailers of upcoming Marvel films, historical videos concerning the musical genius of the Little River Band, and, of course, pictures of my vacation to the largest ball of twine in the world. I'm Ed Berliner, trusting this settles the matter of my 126 email addresses, beginning the hardline for Tuesday, May 19th, 2015.
With new gains made by ISIL and Ramadi, we know that hope is not a strategy.
What we now see is a very different and very dangerous situation. The United States is doing what it can, but ultimately this has to be a struggle that the Iraqi government and the Iraqi people are determined to win for themselves.
North Korea is a divided country, and it's the longest Cold War that we have in the world today. It's a highly militarized situation where war could break out. So we need to work for peace. We need to come and support those in North and South Korea.
Oh, it'll get worse before it gets better. They're not going to forgive and forget. They're going to look for opportunities to retaliate against each other. And law enforcement can't be everywhere all the time.
It isn't about drugs, what everybody thinks it's about. It's about turf. It's about being the biggest, baddest guy on the block. And when somebody moves into your neighborhood, it's disrespect to you and that patch you're wearing. So you have to take care of business, and that's what these clubs were doing.
Homegrown terror is not solely owned by those who come from abroad, living sometimes in our neighborhoods, doing business in the mall, even taking their kids to that pricey private school. There are those who have a darker side not even their friends or family know about. And what happened in Texas recently, 9 people being killed, hundreds arrested over something as inane as a turf battle, insists we pay attention to the biker culture and how easy it is to get caught in the crossfire. Our guest is president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, former assistant director of the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division, Ron Hosko. Ron, it's a pleasure to talk to you again.
Happy to see you, Ed.
Ron, is this simply a subculture, terrorism in our midst, that we have far too often easily overlooked?
Well, these guys, of course, these guys are hiding in plain sight. You have several big domestic and really with international tentacles, biker gangs. They regard themselves as the 1%ers, that being that 1% of the biker population that regards themselves as lawless. They fly their colors with relative impunity, but they are a discreet, really insular culture and stay to themselves. But there are these events like we've seen in Texas this week that are very concerning.
Ron, isn't it fair to say that while people talk about colors and patches, and again, that starts a lot of arguments here, we're talking about more than that. We're talking about gangs like the Outlaws that are involved in arson, kidnapping, explosives, prostitution, homicide, an extremely violent gang in the Mongols. These are not just a couple of guys getting together to fight over turf. These are people who actually are involved in heavy criminal activity on a regular basis, yes?
Right. This is something that's beyond a social group and a fraternity. These are folks who regard territory and brotherhood as something worth fighting and killing for. And so they can be very deadly threats and very serious threats.
Is there a possibility here, Ron, that for a time it seemed as if we didn't pay a lot of attention to it, thinking that maybe these gangs were dying out. Maybe they just weren't that popular anymore. But it seems as if that they still grew over the years. Did we just simply underestimate them, let them fly under the radar for too long?
Well, I think in this case, perhaps law enforcement underestimated or did not have the intelligence to really describe and define how serious this event might be. But when you look at the carnage that's brought on by street gangs in America, by some of the international gangs that we've seen, MS-13, 18th Street Gang coming up from Central America. The violence really eclipses what these motorcycle gangs have done over the last 20 or 30 years. That doesn't mean they cannot be a very serious threat.
Fair to say, too, though, that they also hide, because when you look at the Bandidos, they've got 2,000 to 2,500 across the U.S. and 13 other countries. If you go to their website, they also show an Easter party in Germany and a toy drive in France. Many times they try to think of themselves as being very benevolent, which they may be at times, but doesn't this hide really what they truly are?
It does, and these biker groups tend to stay among themselves and play with each other and shut off themselves from the mainstream biker or public, other than when they're flying their colors. So their conflicts tend to be with other bike organizations, not with the public at large. It's only when we see these events where they don't care about the public, they don't care about where their gunfire is going to end up, that pops into the public view, much like it has in the last couple of days.
Now, here's Sergeant Patrick Swanton of the Waco Police Department. Now, he believes this may be just the beginning. So at this point, he is asking for a truce between the biker gangs. Here he is.
Is this over? Most likely not. We would like it to be. We would ask there to be some type of truce between whatever motorcycle gangs are involved. We would encourage them to try and be a little peaceful and let the bloodshed stop.
Ron, is there ever really any such a thing as a truce with these gangs? I mean, these are organized criminal enterprises.
Well, the outlaw motorcycle gangs certainly are, those one percenters. And my fear, I think, tracks what the sergeant is referring to. I think you have deep divisions here that came out and manifested themselves in the streets of Waco. And you're going to have internal assessments of who won and who lost in this battle. And make no mistake that those who perceive themselves as the loser or fingers are pointed at them for being the weaker, they are going to look for retaliatory opportunities, and they will take retaliation where they can find it.
In this instant, 9 people killed, 18 injured, over 100 arrested here facing serious charges. Do you think that this will then force the FBI to get further involved, take a greater step forward, maybe even with local law enforcement to start weeding these gangs out? Or is that simply something impossible to do with the insular culture they belong to?
And it's not impossible. In fact, these gangs have been repeatedly penetrated by law enforcement, successfully penetrated. Doesn't mean the elimination of the gang, but it does end up in locking up the most serious offenders. I will tell you that the big 4 motorcycle gangs have always been on the FBI's radar, but with all the other things that the FBI has to do, not so much. So this is going to be very much the job of local police and state police, and then the coordinated effort of all of law enforcement.
I got about 30 seconds left here. There are groups already saying that tighter gun control would have kept this from happening. I'm sorry, but my experiences in covering stories like this over the years tell me that that simply isn't the case when you have this sort of element.
Now, there are thousands and thousands of guns out on the street, and frequently what the biker gangs will do is we'll have somebody who doesn't have a criminal record be the gun carriers, but you can inflict deadly force with a knife, with chains, with other objects, and that's how this thing started.
It's unfortunate to think about, but something is simple, and I got to be very honest here. I've owned motorcycles since I was a kid. The gangs that I was involved in, we didn't do this, and we also knew about people like this all the time, and we knew that they were out there, and we knew to stay away from them. It's a shame that they are still existing and still perhaps ruining lives and killing innocent people. Ron Hosko, always a pleasure to have you on the show, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Ed. Good to be with you.
You also. We should point out as well that the Bandidos, which is the group involved here, their membership, as we pointed out, maybe 2,500. They're not just in the United States. They are in maybe 13 other countries, and the Hells Angels, 230 chapters in the U.S., 26 other countries, and 6 continents. This is indeed what could be considered homegrown terrorism. Stay with us, because this is the fastest 60 minutes in news. You stay with us. You tell us what you think as we go through the day. We'll talk about it here. Contact us via social media and let us know what you think about this version of homegrown terrorism. The fastest 60 minutes in news continues.